Hi everybody, here today I want to share some thoughts with you on my text, which I'm calling Not So Far. The foundation of the text is from the Bible in St. John chapter 8. I want to share a story with you that I've read multiple times, and it's always challenged me to look at people in a different light. And that's the big image here I want to share with you here today. Starting in verse 1 in John chapter 8, it says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and early in the morning he came again into this place where he taught, and all the people were coming with him, and he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act.'" Let me just pause there a second. It was interesting to me that they only brought the woman, but they didn't bring the guy. I don't understand that, but that's what happened. Verse 5. It says, "Now in the law, in the Old Testament rule book, if you will, of that culture, Moses commanded us to stone such ladies, such women." Then what do you say? Stoning was a form of execution. They were saying this and testing him so that they might have grounds for accusing Jesus. But Jesus stooped down, and with his finger he wrote in the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and he said to them, "He who is without sin among you," listen to this, "he who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw the stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And when they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, beginning with the older men that were there to execute this lady. Verse 9, "But when they heard it, they just began to walk away, and no one was left there, not even one." So in verse 10, Jesus straightened up, he stood up, and he said to the woman, he said, "Where are they? Did no one condemn you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go from now and sin no more." It's interesting to me that Jesus always stood up for people that were ignored by the religious culture of that day. In fact, there's a paraphrase of this text, and one little sentence in it says this: "The sinless one among you go first, throw the stone." And I think sometimes you and I have a tendency to judge people when we don't know the whole story. Oftentimes we judge people without having all the facts, and maybe we look at them from a certain light because we live in a certain culture, or we look at things from a certain set of glasses. There are a few takeaways for me in this text. First, the Jewish scribes and the Pharisees, the people who were part of the religious culture of the time, they didn't have a habit of handing out and hanging out with the public. They wanted people to come to them, whereas Jesus chose to hang around with regular people. Jesus understood the temptations and challenges of regular people. So Jesus in this story challenged the religious leaders to not be hypocrites when they had skeletons in their own closets. I wonder how many of us judge people when we have skeletons in our own closets. Laurie Beth Jones is an author that's been around for mercy about 30 years. And in one of her books called Jesus Life Coach, she said, "The fruit merely is a manifestation of what is inside the tree all along." And I think this is what Jesus was trying to get across to the people that he was trying to talk to, those religious people. That, you know, if you're one who's throwing stones at a lot of people, maybe you need to look at your heart first. Jesus didn't badger the woman about having adultery. He just told her to stop it. I wonder how many of us tend to, be pick on people when, we really should not be too heavy on them. Laurie Beth Jones said it in another book called Jesus in Blue Jeans, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. It says, "A wise person does not fear the edges and fringes, but studies them. Indeed, he or she is often in them, working to make change happen." And that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus chose to hang around on the fringes with other people that were, frankly, unlike him, to impact them in ways that we're still reading about 2,000 years later. Jesus thrived. He thrived when he chose to hang around people on the fringes of society. He changed the lives of people that were unlike him. Now think about that a minute. If you and I want to change the culture, if you and I want to change just people in our own family, or we want to impact, is probably a better word. When we want to impact people in our own lives, we can't expect them to come to us all the time. Oftentimes we need to hang around with them to impact their lives in a big way. Again, I love Lori Beth Jones. She said one time, she said, Jesus did not waste his time judging others. He said he saw judging others as a major energy leak. He stated many times that he did not come to judge, but that he came to help. He did not spend 1 minute on the demolition crew. He spent his energy on, listen, creation and restoration. I know you know people, and I certainly know people who have a tendency of tearing other people down, when that's not the example that Jesus taught us in the Bible, that he came to restore, to build other people up. Lori Beth Jones once again says, judgment halts progress. When we judge, we inhibit our forward motion because we're always looking back at what people used to be and what they used to do and the mistakes they used to make, instead of looking forward based on what they can do or what they can accomplish. So when you regularly walk with people, listen, when you regularly walk with people, you tend to understand their pain. You tend to feel their pain. So the farther you are away from people in your life, the less likely you are to understand what they're going through. Now, Forbes magazine had a great article about people who are leaders and some of the characteristics of those people who lead. Again, you don't need a title, as Mark Sanborn said. You don't need a title to lead, but you need to have certain characteristics in your life in order to lead. So a few of these characteristics that Forbes magazine shared. You have to have consistently strong work ethic. It says that great leaders despise false promises and people that create lots of unnecessary noise to get attention. I think most of the time that you and I forget that leaders, true leaders, are really there to serve other people. The article goes on to say that people who lead in any form are not afraid to take risks and admit wrongdoing. When you mess up, just say you mess up. By the way, everybody messes up. It goes on to say that powerful people have long-lasting impact, meaning that they don't just impact people once, they continue to impact people over and over again. You see, Jesus walked with people. He didn't expect people to come to this synagogue in the religious place and go find him. He went with the people. He hung around the people in order to impact their lives in dramatic ways. Keith Quisenberry mentioned that people are attracted to stories. In fact, there's a study that says that when a teacher tells a story to a group of people or a student, the wavelengths of the storyteller and the people who listen to the story are almost the same. It's very interesting. So stories connect us with the hearts of other people, and that's exactly what Jesus did. If you read through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus told stories all the time in order to connect with other people. So stories create connection. Think about that. Stories create connection. Michael Rogers shares a story about the importance of integrity in people who lead other people. Again, I'm not talking about you having to be an executive at some company. You can be right in your own home or right in your own workplace if you want to lead people or impact people. It says in the 1930s, there was a young boy who had become addicted and obsessed with eating sugar. So his mom decided to help and took a long and hot journey with her son, walking many miles and hours under the scorching sun. She finally reached Gandhi and asked him to tell her son to stop eating sugar. It wasn't good for his health. So Gandhi replied, "I cannot tell him that, but you may bring him back in a few weeks and then I will talk to him." The mom was confused and upset and took the boy home. 2 weeks later, she came back, and this time Gandhi looked directly at the boy and said, quote, "Boy, you should stop eating sugar. It is not good for your health." The boy nodded his head and promised he wouldn't, and the boy's mom was puzzled. She asked, "Why didn't you tell him that 2 weeks ago when I brought him here to see you?" Gandhi smiled and he nodded and said, "Mother, 2 weeks ago I was eating a lot of sugar myself." Talking about integrity. We're talking about people who practice what they preach. That's really what this is really about. Jesus learned and earned the respect of the public by hanging out with the public. Again, Jesus earned the respect of people by hanging out with people. So the best way to see where people are coming from, listen, the best way to see where people are coming from is to go and visit where the people have been. Let me say that again. The best way to see where people are coming from is to go and visit where the people have been. That means to invest your time, your energy, your talents in the lives of people that have struggled in a variety of different ways, to place yourself in their shoes. That word's called empathy. To place yourself in their situations that will allow you to share their pain and to feel their pain. The late John Wanamaker was the king of retail, and one day while walking through his store in Philadelphia, he noticed a customer behind the counter, a customer who needed help, and not paying any attention. The customer service reps were having fun and laughing without really caring about the customers at all. So without a word, the owner of this place slipped behind the counter and waited on the customer himself. And then he quietly handed the purchase to the salesperson to be wrapped, and then he went on his way. And then later, the owner of this place was quoted as saying, quote, "I learned 30 years ago it was foolish to scold." He says, "I have enough trouble overcoming my own limitations without fretting over the fact that God has not seen fit to distribute evenly the gift of intelligence." Kind of a silly story, but oftentimes you and I just need to step up and do instead of griping and complaining about people who don't. In the book of Mark in the New Testament, the Living Bible shares this piece of a story. It says, "Then Jesus went out to the seashore again and preached to the crowds that gathered around him. And as he was walking up the beach, he saw a man named Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth. And he told Levi, he said, 'Come with me. Come be my disciple.'" Now, let me back up a second here. That Levi was, let's just say he took money from the people that he was supposedly collecting tax money from. In other words, he had a little stipend that he would collect over and above the taxes in order to line his own pockets. So at that moment, Levi jumped to his feet and went along. And that night, listen, Levi, the guy that was pretty much hated by the culture and the regular folk, he invited his fellow tax collectors and many other notorious people to be his dinner guests so that they could meet Jesus and his disciples. Now, there were many men of this type among the crowds that followed Jesus. Verse 16 says, "But when some of the Jewish religious leaders saw him, listen, eating with these people of ill repute, they said to his disciples, 'How can he stand it eating with such scum?'" This paraphrase says. Verse 17, "When Jesus heard what they were saying, he told them, quote, 'Sick people need the doctor, not healthy ones. I haven't come to tell good people to repent, but the bad ones.'" So Jesus again chose to turn the culture, turn the religious hierarchy on its head by doing things opposite of what they had been doing for a couple thousand years by that time. A businessman was highly critical of his competitors. He was just really nasty, the story says. And it says, "Why? They are the dirtiest windows in town." He was looking at all the other store owners around him. I said, "Man, they got some dirty windows." Fellow businessmen, people grew tired of the man's continual criticism and nitpicking comments about the windows. So one day over coffee, the businessman carried the subject just a little too far. Before leaving, a fellow store owner suggested that the man get his own windows washed. He followed the advice, and the next day at coffee, he exclaimed, he says, "I can't believe it. As soon as I washed my windows, my competitor must have cleaned his too. You should see them shine." Well, you know what? If you can read between the lines here, The other people's windows were clean. It was the other guy, the guy that was always picking a negative, his glasses, his windows were the ones that were dirty. I wonder how many times you and I have fallen into that we look at other people and their problems when, you know what, we need to check our glasses first. We need to look in the mirror first before we go picking on other people. Confucius said one time, don't complain about the snow on your neighbor's roof when your own doorstep is unclean. Yikes. There's an old saying that's been around for I don't know how long, but you know, those of us who live in a glass house ought not throw stones. Jesus didn't pull any punches about people who thought that they were all that. Have you ever worked around people who thought that they were all that? Do you have maybe relatives who think they're all that? I could describe that a little more crassly, but I will not go there. But let's just say that they think they're practically perfect in every way. Over in Matthew chapter 15 in the Bible, a paraphrase of this text puts it this way, starting in verse 1. Now some Pharisees and teachers of religious law now arrived from Jerusalem to see Jesus. They asked him, why do your disciples obey the age-old tradition? Why don't they do it? For they ignore our tradition of ceremonial hand washing before they eat. In that culture, which still applies here today, that you wash your hands and say a certain prayer before you eat your food. Verse 3. But Jesus replied, and why do you, by your traditions, violate the direct commandments of God? For instance, God says, honor your father and mother, and anyone who speaks disrespectfully of father or mother must be put to death. But you say it is all right for people to say to their parents, sorry, I can't help you, for I vowed to give to God what I'm really supposed to give to you. Verse 6. In this way, you say that they don't need to honor their parents, and so you cancel the word of God for the sake of your own tradition. He skips down. It says that, Jesus said in verse 10, that then Jesus called to the crowd to come and listen. He said, and try to understand this. It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you. You are defiled by the words that come out of your mouth. So Jesus was really trying to share with those who listened that what we do and what we say and how we treat other people has a tremendous impact on how we're viewed in a variety of different ways. I have learned that people are attracted to people who are transparent. Again, I've learned that people are attracted to people who are transparent. I don't know about you, but I kind of back away from people who have this facade that they're not the real deal, or they're trying to portray an image that's not really them. I tend to back away from people like that. Jesus was fond of saying, in paraphrase, of course, he says, so you fell down, don't stay down, get back up. He said that over and over, not in those exact words, of course, but he said that continuously throughout his life, that he was there to pick people up in ways that maybe the religious culture or maybe the society wanted to ignore people in their lives. Jesus wasn't distracted by people's failures. Think about that a minute. Jesus Christ was not distracted by the failures of other people. What upset him was the religious crowd who acted as if they never fell on their face. You know, I have a tendency to, at least years ago at least, I had a tendency to think that people that were influential in some way had to have everything perfect in every part of their lives. Well, I've learned through reading many, many books and knowing of other people that even the most famous struggle in certain areas of their lives. So again, I've learned that people are attracted to other people who are transparent. So it's interesting to note that Jesus wasn't looking for perfect people. Think about all the people, if you know his life, that he wasn't really, it didn't matter if the people were perfect. He was looking for genuine people. He was looking for people that actually were the real deal. Whether or not they had problems or not didn't matter to him, but he was looking for genuineness, for the real deal in people's lives. Jesus was a master of telling stories. I kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago. Stories create images which change behavior. How many times haven't you shared examples and stories with people in your life that helped them change the direction that they had been going up to that point. A guy named Aristotle that lived, I would say, about 2,000 years ago, said the soul never thinks without a picture. So if I were to describe something to you, you don't see the words in your mind, you see the images, you see the pictures of what I'm trying to describe. So Jesus tapped into the power of pictures. Think about that a minute. Jesus, and by the way, great leaders tap into the power of pictures. Jesus found out that the farther he got away from the top of the religious people, the more real people he found. I think many times people who are in some sort of role of leadership, they forget where they came from. They forget how hard it was to get where they are now. Versus the regular folk, not to say that the folks who have arrived aren't regular, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that those who haven't reached a certain status are just the real deal. What you see is what you get. It's very interesting to me that people in our lives around us tend to be more genuine when we're more genuine around them. When we approach them in a way that we think we're all that, or we think we know more than them, people tend to really back off. Tony Schwartz wrote, "Genuine humility is a reflection of neither weakness nor insecurity. Instead, it implies a respectful appreciation, listen, of the strengths of others, a lack of personal pretension, and a more relaxed sense of confidence that doesn't require external recognition." Think about that a minute. So you and I have to understand that if we're going to impact people, in whatever form that is, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whether it's in your other outside activities, that we need to be the real deal. And we need to not be so far away from the people that we're trying to impact. So Michael Hyatt shares a few tips on how to impact people. He says that oftentimes you have to expose yourself, expose your heart, expose your pain, expose your struggles. And at least in my world, I found that the more I have been apt to explore and expose where I struggle, the more attracted people are to me. Because I'm far from perfect, and I don't even pretend to be. But when you are genuine, people are attracted to that. He says that oftentimes that we should build people up around us if we want to impact people around us. Instead of building ourselves up, you want to give back. You want to lift other people up. He says that you need to accept confrontation. Some people want to run from confrontation when, in fact, confrontation can be a means of healing to people. It can be a means of helping them grow. And sometimes it can be a means of you shaking them up to a point that they had never been shaken up before, and they get the aha, if you will, that can change their lives in a big way. And then Michael Hyatt ends with saying that you have to find the strengths in other people. Sometimes you need a magnifying glass to find those strengths in other people, but everybody has strengths that they can tap into. So over in Hebrews 4 in the New Testament, it says this. It's talking about Jesus who was not so far away from people. Let me just share a piece of it. In fact, a paraphrase of it says this in Hebrews 4. "But Jesus, the Son of God, is our great high priest, who has gone to heaven itself to help us. Therefore, let us never stop trusting him. This high priest of ours understands, listen, our weaknesses, since he had the same temptations we do, though he never once gave way to them and sinned. So let us boldly come to the throne of God and stay there to receive his mercy and to find grace to help us in the time of need." Let me back up one sentence here or two. It says that Jesus had the same temptations we do, though he never once gave way to them. And the only way that Jesus could have placed himself in that situation to be tempted just like us was to place himself around other people, around regular people in a regular life, that he was able to understand the pains and the temptations that other people went through. So Jesus was never shy, listen, about sharing his why. Again, Jesus was never shy about sharing his why. His why attracted people to him. So let me end with a story. about how you and I should not be so far away from other people, and how we are here to leave a legacy, to leave a blessing, to leave the world a better place. The story is called The Acorn Planter by Brian Cavanaugh. In the 1930s, a young traveler was exploring the French Alps. He came upon a vast stretch of barren land, and it was desolate. It was forbidding. It was ugly. It was the kind of place you would hurry and run away from. Then suddenly, the young traveler stopped dead in his tracks, and in the middle of this vast wasteland was a bent-over old man. On his back was a sack of acorns. In his hand was a 4-foot length of iron pipe. The man was using the iron pipe to punch holes in the ground. Then from the sack, he would take an acorn and put it in the hole. Later, the old man, the traveler, he said, I've planted over 100,000 acorns. Perhaps only a tenth of them are going to grow. The old man's wife had died and his son had died, and this is how he chose to spend his final years. He says, I want to do something useful. 25 years later, the now not as young traveler returned to the same desolate area. What he saw amazed him. He could not believe his own eyes. The land was covered with a beautiful forest, 2 miles wide and 5 miles long. Birds were singing and animals were playing, and wildflowers perfumed the air. The traveler stood there recalling the desolation that once was. A beautiful oak forest stood there now, all because someone cared. Jesus' life is an example of that. If we want to impact people's lives, listen, we must place ourselves close to people, even those who may not believe like we do. So don't put yourself so far away that you can't feel what people feel and you can't hurt when they hurt. My name's John Carver. Thanks for watching.